Here we have our screen from our iPad with the HOBOmobile app installed. The MX1102 is a unique product in that it can be used wirelessly using the Bluetooth Low Energy technology and a device running the HOBOmobile app. It can be an iOS device, such as here we're using an iPad. It can be a smartphone. It can be running Android. The Android operating system also is supported. So we're going to show you some screens of the app, some scenes as they call them, to get you familiar with that. And then we're going to switch over into HOBOware because this product can be used with HOBOware via a direct USB connection as well. So to get started, again, you get the HOBOmobile app free of charge from the App Store for your iOS device or from Google Play for your Android device. So we're going to tap on the HOBOmobile icon we see here in the middle of the screen. And this is going to open our Hobos scene in the application. So working from the top, you see there's a search bar. So you have the ability to give your MX devices a name or put them in a group. So you can search on those, or you can also search on the serial number if you know the serial number of the device. Below that we see Bluetooth Low Energy devices advertise that they're available continuously once you put batteries in them. So what we're seeing is one that's in range called test. And then we see a list of all the others that I have connected to or been in range within the last day. I'm in a different facility today, so I only see the one logger here. So to get access to this logger in order to configure it and or read out the data or get its status, etc., set a password, we tap on that to get there. The first thing I want to do before I do that, though, is down at the bottom of the screen you'll see some icons: Hobos, data files, settings, and about. So we're in the Hobos scene now. If we click on data files, it shows all the data files that are currently in the memory of my iPad. And this is where you can tap on to expand these. For example, if I tap on the first one, there's my graph. We're gonna go through the readout screens later. So just to show you what the data files tab does. Next to that, we have something called settings. These are global settings. The first one are time saving settings, and again, these are turned on right now. You can turn them off or on. See that? Turn them on, and then go to the time. Again, you can have the logger automatically start from its previous configuration, which is what it says, automatically start, or you can check off show configuration screen or configure screen that allows you to configure the logger for each deployment. Below that, you can allow HOBOmobile to load a previous configuration automatically. You can fill a configure screen automatically from that previous logger. So if you have multiple loggers that you want to set up the same way, you set up the first one, and then it will automatically load that same configuration in the next loggers that you connect to and go into the configuration mode. Again, you can set default start types. So you can select the previous start type, or you can have it. You can configure it so it will start now or on the next interval. Again, automatically configure that when you go into the configure screen, when you connect to the logger. And then you can also set a default name if you want to. You can use the current logger name, or you can uncheck that and put in a new name each time. Below that, you can set what your global units, what your preference is for units. US units or SI units. US units would be like degrees Fahrenheit or feet. SI units would be degrees Celsius, meters. You can choose to automatically set the time zone of your logger based on the location that your device detects, or you can put that in manually. If you turn this off and go below that, you can select manually what time zone you're in. You can also select to only show your devices, so only the ones that you've connected to in the past, not every logger that's in sight. For most applications, that's probably for most customers, it's probably not necessary because they won't have hundreds of these. They might have hundreds of these, I don't know, but basically this gives you this option so you don't have to scroll through or search through lots of devices needlessly. Below that, we have some diagnostics and troubleshooting. Utilities. Again, you probably want to talk to technical support about if you want to, or if you need to share diags or enable logging. And again, that's for troubleshooting issues. And then the next tab over is About, and it talks about the version of HOBOmobile that is currently on this machine. It gives you access to the guides and manuals and some videos. It gives you contact information, version history, etc. License agreement, all of that. So let's go back to Hobos. And we're going to connect to this Hobo by tapping on it. And now we're connected. By default, just like in HOBOware and our other USB loggers, the default name is the serial number of the logger. Here, this particular device had the name of test on it. So here, from working top to bottom, we can see test. We can see two little icons underneath there. One is an unlocked. It's a padlock that's telling us it does not have a password. If it had a password, it would be locked. It's unlocked right now. Battery level icon gives us the status of the device. It's configured in logging currently. That's what our sensors just read. The last readings on the sensors. Moving to the right is the serial number, the model number. We get a signal strength meter for the Bluetooth signal. And it tells us how much memory is used. We are wrapping currently, so that means it overwrites old data with new when it fills up the memory. Under actions, this is where we can configure the logger, we can read out data, we can get status, we can stop it from logging, we can page the logger. If we click page, the logger will beep at us and say hello on the front of the screen. Below that this is where we put in our password. If you put in a password and you forget it, there's a way to reset that by pressing two of the buttons on the front of the logger, and you can read. That's described in the manual. So let's go through the configure screen. Again, this device is logging, but there's data in there I don't really care about, so we'll click on configure. And again, the app is prompting us, are you sure you want to configure the logger? Because if we configure it and relaunch it, any data that was recorded in the logger will be overwritten and lost. So this is an important message to understand. Because there's data in here that I don't really care about, I'm just going to say yes. And now we're in the configure screen. In the configure screen, we have the ability to give the logger a name. Again, by default, the name is the serial number of the logger. We can also assign it to a group. So available groups, awesome is a great name for a group. If you have a series of loggers in different locations in a facility, it's handy to use the grouping tool to identify groups of loggers in certain locations. It makes it easier to find them. Location is obtained from the device you're using. This is my iPad connected to a Wi-Fi network, so it's getting the location from that. You can certainly turn that off in your settings, either in your iPad, and you can see that it periodically goes away. That's just because of the way my Wi-Fi network is working right now. We count the number of deployments. just like we do with any of our UX products, a USB. There's no limit to that number of deployments. We just keep track of how many times the logger was launched. Below that, this is where we set our logging interval. Again, it can be down to once a second if we want to, or once every 18 hours, or anywhere in between. Again, this is the MX1102, the CO2 logger. So you pay a penalty for logging faster than 5 minutes because basically our battery life is based on a 5-minute or a longer logging interval, and that was based on some significant market research with some of our customers where they said 10 minutes, 15-minute logging for indoor air quality is fine. So again, this helps us maintain that 6-month battery life on the logger. If you want to log faster, you certainly can, but you do pay a penalty for logging that fast in battery life, and you will get a warning from the app, and both from the app and from HOBOware that states that you may not get your 6-month battery life if you log faster than 5 minutes. Again, both HOBOmobile and HOBOware calculate your logging duration, and there's a little I in informational button, and if you click on that, it explains what duration means and what battery life also means. We can select how we want the logger to start logging. So again, the default is now. So as soon as we hit start, it starts logging. We can start on the next logging interval. In this case, with a 5-minute interval, it waits till the next 5-minute increment to start logging. We could tell it to start on a button push. So if we select button push, we can take the logger, mount it in its location, and then press and hold that button for 3 seconds, and the logger will begin logging. Or we can select on date and time, and this is where we can program in a future time and date for it to start automatically up to 6 months in advance. Below that, we can configure how we want the logger to react, how we want it to stop its logging. So here we can configure it to either stop when the memory fills, or we can have it wrap, which basically is what some people call circular logging or first in, first out logging, where when the memory fills, it will begin logging new data over the old when it fills up. We can also configure it so that we can stop it on a button push. The other option is, again, for stop logging, we can configure it to stop automatically at some future time. So here we're programming in a stop time sometime in the future. Or we can say we want it to stop after a specific time has elapsed. A day, a week, a month, an hour, whatever. Below that is where we would configure our sensors. These are on-off buttons. Also, this is where we configure our temperature alarms, or our alarms for each channel, I should say. Here we're in the temperature channel. If we click the little on-off button, that will enable the high alarm. Again, we set a threshold with the little slide bar. So this is a high alarm if it goes above 62.28, and again, we're in US units, so degrees Fahrenheit, we'll get that alarm. We can also set a low alarm if we want, works the same way. Duration is basically how many samples we're going to take before that alarm comes in, based in minutes. If we say 0 minutes, the next time the logger refreshes its screen, we get the alarm. Below that, we can select how we want HOBOware to accumulate those or evaluate those samples. So if we say cumulative samples and we have multiple, again, we have multiple samples, let's say 5 minutes worth of samples. If we say cumulative, they don't have to be consecutively in a row, the samples. They can be staggered, but as soon as they add up to 5 minutes worth of samples, we get the alarm. Or we can set consecutive, which means they have to be in a row. RH is similar, CO2 also similar. However, with CO2, we also have the ability to put in here an altitude compensation value. Again, altitude compensation is, it really kicks in above 1,000 feet or so. Basically, it has to do with the effect of barometric pressure over the technique being used for measuring CO2. And here is where we can select if we want it to manually or automatically calibrate itself from the factory. Both of these are enabled. You can disable one or the other. You can't disable both. From the factory, both are enabled. Below that, under Advanced, this is where we would select our logging mode. Fixed interval logging at a 5-minute logging interval means the logger will be in a low power state, and then it will wake up, take a measurement, and it will base its logged values at a 5-minute fixed interval. Burst logging, again, if we select burst logging, it will disable our wrap configuration. It goes to stop when it's full. But basically, burst logging is based on a threshold, just like an alarm would be. So if we select a high burst level, basically what this is going to do is if the temperature, with this configuration, say if the temperature goes above 68.7, the logger will start logging at a different rate. And when it goes back below 68, it will go back to its original logging rate. That's how burst works. And again, this is where we would set our interval, our burst logging interval. So in this case, we have a 1 second burst interval set. So when it goes above that threshold for temperature or below the temperature threshold, it will go into that 1 second logging rate until it goes back into normal range. And again, you can set it for, you can set burst ranges for temperature, RH, or CO2. But just keep in mind that CO2 burst conditions are set at a slower sampling rate because of the way the sensor works, because we try to retain battery power as much as possible or limit battery drain. If you're connected to a USB connection with the logger, the burst can be faster. However, you don't have any way to set that with the app. You would do that in HOBOware. Oh, back to logging mode again. You can also set statistical logging. Statistical logging is very much just like with UX products, some of our other USB loggers. Basically, what we can do is, if we select max, min, we can select all of these if we want to. But let's just talk about average for a moment. That's a little bit easier to talk about. So we're going to set a sampling interval for our statistical logging. We'll set it to 1 minute. Okay. Done. So now we can see our statistical sampling is 1 minute, and we have average statistical logging configured. So what this means is that we'll get our 5-minute data, but we'll also get a series based on the average of 5 1-minute samples. If we turn off normal right here, all we'll get is just the 1 minute, the 5 1-minute average series recorded. If we say normal, we'll get 2 series for each. So 2 series for temperature, 2 series for CO2, 2 series for RH. Maximum minimum, also kind of the same thing. where we're looking for the maximum value to a 1-minute resolution within each 5-minute interval. So you'll get a maximum value during that 5-minute interval based on a 1-minute sample and a minimum. And again, if we turn off normal, we will only get that data. Okay. Turn those off. Go back to cancel. There we go. So those are logging modes. The other thing we can do is we can turn off the LCD if we want to. If we turn off the LCD, we can enable it again, have it come back on with a button push. Once we have the configuration screen configured, we can click Start, and the logger will be configured and begin logging.